Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday. The Mike Pence legacy came to a very quick end today. It's probably the shortest one in Indiana gubernatorial history. We just saw his final two vetoes overridden. Governor Holcomb made the very common sense decision to address the East Chicago lead problem, which has been our own Flint in the making. He pardoned an innocent man, which seemed like basic human decency. And he allowed that bicentennial cell phone tower deal to die a cow's death here in the Hoosier State. He's left and gone to Washington, and we're already on to a new day. That's been a fascinating thing to observe. It doesn't require you to be gone for very long for the people to turn to other matters. I'm bringing us what I really wanted to talk about this morning, which is some of the recent developments and rhetoric regarding the largest tax increase in state history, the infrastructure investment proposal that has come from our friends across the aisle. I listen with great amusement to my friend Speaker Bosma. While he assails recommendations from the Indiana House Democrats, he also accepts them at the same time. He seems to take some of the ideas and then call them terrible that they were even suggested. I guess that's politician speak, but that's the reality of what's happening to some large degree. You noted very quietly and unceremoniously in Ways and Means yesterday, they actually took the House Democrats' number one proposal, which is to move all of the state sales tax on gasoline over into the transportation funds so we can improve our roads and bridges. That is something that is strongly supported by the people of Indiana. That was our idea. We brought it forth last year, and it is completely Hoosier common sense in order to do that. Matter of fact, when I've talked to folks around Indiana, they thought that that's where the sales tax they paid on gasoline went anyways, and I had to explain that that wasn't quite the case yet, but it looks like we might be moving in a direction then that will be the case. I also noted as House Democrats made some well-intentioned proposals on transportation earlier in the week. The powers that be on the other side of the aisle said that we were being tax increasers. Of course, we keep taxes the way they are. I really found that to be very humorous since they're the ones increasing taxes. I think when you're the ones increasing taxes, that is a charge that pretty much gets removed from your arsenal. And I want to remove it here today because we've identified ways, if there is a will across the aisle, to have a sizable investment in our state's roads and bridges while maintaining current revenue streams as they are. And I think there's a lot of support for that out in the public, and as they hear that support, I think that they may further adjust. Another important development this week too, and I know it was reported by the Associated Press, and I've seen it in some other venues. Those who actually sell gasoline for a vocation are going to be opposing House Bill 1002 as it currently exists. That means signs, that means lawmakers' faces sitting at gas stations. That means when people go in to buy their Little Debbies and their cup of coffee and pay for their gas, they're going to be seeing those things. I don't know what the effect of that's going to be yet, but certainly I don't think it will be a non-zero effect. So it's going to be worth observing how that impacts some of the discourses we have here. As always, I think that this is a 4-month task and not simply a 1 or 2 week one. I expect that, if the Speaker wants to build a pass, he's going to get one in some form over to the Senate, where we're really going to see what the overall willingness of the Hoosier State is to make some of these, what I would submit as well, prudent investments in our roads and bridges for our future. And I'm hopeful in April we can have something that will have broad support and broad public consensus. I think we're a long way from getting there, but I do still believe it's possible. So I want to observe, too, I think Governor Holcomb is taking a sensible approach right now, and one that most Indiana governors would take, which is to, watch the lawmakers charge out of their trenches. see how the situation develops, and then see how we might be helpful in terms of bringing together that consensus. I think he's still, he's remaining flexible. He's keeping an open mind about different transportation funding options. And I think some of them may include some things that we've suggested. So I think there's still a good possibility for a bipartisan accomplishment. You don't have to have a bipartisan accomplishment, but I think most chief executives tend to like them if it's possible, because they serve all of us, and at least on paper, they serve all of us and not just a few, at least not if they want to remain in office for an extended period. So a lot more work to do. I did want to note some of the movement that's happened there, and I think we have a long ways to go. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions about a multitude of matters.
Obviously, when the House panel decided to adopt, as you say, adopt the Democratic plan of phasing the gas tax or the sales tax on gasoline in 1 year as opposed to 3 or 4, that $600 million over the biennium, Dr. Brown says they're not going to try not touch education, not touch the reserves. Where should that $600 million come from?
Well, I'm going to give what the answer that the people give. We have a surplus, and we do have it in reserve for doing very important things. And I'm going to mention, infrastructure is a reinvestment. It's something that continues to yield a dividend. It yields its own revenue streams due to the increased economic activity. So to look at it dynamically, you can expect a positive prediction on revenues in the future. So I want to say too, I mean, we propose these things. They say what we say is a budget buster, even though we still leave a big surplus. They do the same thing, and it seems like we're supposed to, without question, credit them with their great fiscal responsibility. That's just talk. Okay, they're suggesting similar things because the public thinks it's a good idea, and that's one of the reasons I'm hopeful that we can get there in some form. Like I said, with a bipartisan accomplishment. These things are affordable, and it does, call into question whether the tax increase to the level that they're suggesting is really, really necessary. Because you talk to a citizen on the street, and first thing you'll hear from him or her is, didn't we have all this extra money? I want to say one final point, Abdul, about the education funding. There's not a lot of debate about the aggregate level of education funding. It can always be better, but we think we can live within our means based on what's been allocated in the past. Where we differ is based on how the dollars are being used. It's not so much the overall level of dollars.
On the veto overrides, most of your caucus voted with Governor Pence, I suppose, on the IDEM regulations bill. Speaker Bosma, Representative Wolkin say it doesn't tie IDEM's hands, it just gives the legislature more oversight. Why is that not an appropriate step?
That is a bill that's been around since I started. This back in 1998. The idea that we shouldn't be any more stringent than the EPA. Well, you know what? Donald Trump, I think, wants to reduce the EPA staff by 50% or some unreasonable number. It may be that we have to, in some circumstances, do things that the EPA is not willing to do. In the East Chicago situation is just an illustration. We don't know what other East Chicago situations might be out there. And Governor Pence was at least foresighted enough to realize that there were some known unknowns, to sound like Donald Rumsfeld for a second. So I think we have our own regulatory authority, and under a Republican governor, I don't know what fears they have of this regulatory overreach. If anything, we've seen a lot of underreach in some very clear situations.
Should we be afraid of Governor Holcomb excessively regulating? I mean, is that?
I wouldn't.
Be what they're saying.
Yeah, it does seem to be what they're saying. I would not presume Governor Holcomb to be a big-time regulator. Okay, but maybe they're afraid of some things I don't know about.
Should the legislature have a veto in effect over all state regulations?
Well, they do anyways. I mean, you can pass a new law, change the regulation. So there's plenty of oversight involved.
What's your plans for your no new taxes proposal for road funding. It didn't get a single question
Right.
from Republicans yesterday. They didn't give any support.
Well, they don't. That didn't surprise me. That's what I expected to happen. You don't want to. You don't want to have it. If you don't want to debate something, then you don't debate it. You run it on through. I don't think they're comfortable with the discussion. I think on the floor here, they're going to have the opportunity to have the discussion, and I think there'll be substantial elements of the plan we propose be presented on the House floor, where you have to have some debate, and you don't always have to have that in committee, particularly when it was the second committee that was considering the bill. And there may be some other measures considered as well. There may be some adaptations to their plan. We'll be considering that, and said there's some long-term interest here. And you don't expect to prevail necessarily on every given vote and every step of the way. But if you take the long-term view and you keep raising the points, it's very clear you can influence the end product, and that's certainly what we're striving to do.
So you're not expecting much success next week, maybe when it goes over to the Senate?
Well, I'm going to use the word non-zero again. There are some pretty potent issues that we raised, and you have your gas station owners involved, and you have people at the pump a little bit more engaged at the issue. There's no telling what might change. It's ultimately the public that decides all these things.
Dr. McCormick would like vouchers and pre-K expansion to be standalone bills. Governor Holcomb says he's focused solely on the pre-K expansion effort. You had Republicans on the floor this week talk about how they should be standalone bills. Do you think when the Senate gets done with it, they will be standalone bills?
We'll have to see, because there is a great deal of obfuscation when it comes to public education funding. Brandy, you may not remember this because it's not that interesting, but going back to last session, one thing we've been very adamant about is whatever you're spending on traditional public schools, whatever you're spending on charter schools, whatever you're spending on vouchers, put them in different pots of money so we can see. The policy is the policy. We're really into the phase where we need to be debating the cost, and it's hard to debate the cost when it's all sort of corralled into the same budget item, and then you have to extrapolate and extract and do statistical analysis and regression models and all sorts of other things. That's not that easy to do. It should be clear for the public to see. So I think separating is good. I wasn't aware that the state superintendent had said that, but if she voiced those types of wishes, that's a positive, because they should be separated. We got to see. Once you can see, then you can evaluate how well the policy is working, because you can tie the policy results to the dollars themselves.
Mr. Leader, the Senate Utilities Committee today considered a bill that a lot of solar advocates say would sort of put a damper on that industry, Senate Bill 309. What are your thoughts on the sort of...
Is that Haley back there? I can only partially, you're only in my partial view. Is that the one that makes it, is that net metering things? I'm just mystified by the fear of solar energy. It seems like there's been an effort afoot to stamp out an industry before it even really gets going. If we have all of a sudden every Hoosier home with a solar panel, and it's making some market inequities and distortions that we have to deal with, I think you can deal with them then, but there's this wish to deal with them before they even happen. And we know, even in a bipartisan way, we have to allow the development of alternative energy resources. I think in Indiana, coal is still going to be part of that. I mean, let's be realistic here. But we have to have other things, and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be stamping them out before they even really start to develop.
Scott, this past couple of weeks we've seen debates over Airbnb, debates over Tesla, and even to a lesser degree the whole solar industry. As we look at Indiana, just new technologies, new innovations, new ways to do business, philosophically, where are you on that innovation versus consumer regulation versus what starts to turn into protectionism?
Right. You know what? I take a pragmatic view towards these things. It's a case-by-case basis. I think back to telecommunications, back when we had Ma Bell. Well, technology changed, and we need a new regulatory environment, and we did those things. And I think that when the market changes due to technology, government probably is always going to lag a little bit behind, but sooner or later, the technology is going to force some changes in policy. Where I differ on a couple of different things, and this is on the Airbnb issue, when you have compelling local reasons to have a particular regulatory environment with respect to the new technology, I think that I think given the era of uncertainty, the legislature ought to give a little bit of deference to the differing views. They're laboratories of policy making too. So that's where we've seen some differences out here. Sometimes, but we also have to be realistic. Sometimes technology can change things that we value for other reasons, and then we have to consider those things too.
What's your sense of the Airbnb bill's chances?
I don't know. He's got problems. He's got problems. I have. As my friend Matt Lehman has.
The bill.
You know what? I have. Yeah, the bill has problems. I've got some problems with it too because, again, we're telling local communities exactly what they have to do. I also think some members got confused a little bit. If you don't have a local ordinance on short-term rentals, you can rent out to your heart's content. You don't have any problems at all. We're really only talking about the narrow universe of people who live under an existing ordinance. I would simply submit that if you don't have an ordinance, you don't need this bill because you can already do it. If you do have an ordinance, your debates with your town board. And if your town board's going to have one and they don't currently have one, you can go stop it there. It's really about the level of decision making more than it is the actual policy and where it's made.
What's your take on the cancellation of the Agile Networks deal?
I'm going to withhold. I need to review that a little bit more. Yeah, I will get back to. I don't usually do this, but I want to get back to you on that.
What's the take of your town board on the Airbnb bill? I know they're...
Yeah, actually, I can explain that a little. Long Beach, Indiana, the childhood home of Chief Justice John Roberts. They have a ban on short-term rentals because they have a very narrow reason for doing it. They have a lot of out-of-town owners. A lot of people live in maybe Chicago or out of state or in parts of Michigan. They're here in the summertime when they're not around. They might rent out a week at a time at their home. If there's problems, they're not necessarily around right away to contact about the problem. So there was some. Right or wrong, the town board decided to do that, and the community decided to do that, and the community can change it again if they want. But that's where the discussions belong. And sometimes there's unique local situations that city county council number 2 cannot possibly mediate. It's why we have local government to figure these things out.
So have you had that social media talk with your caucus?
Perhaps. That's more of a from my vantage point. That's more of a routine reminder, and I think
It was a last year thing.
I don't think we bat 1,000, but we do okay. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks,